Brazil, the site of this summer's World Cup.
Wow!
Biggest stars in the game will be there.
Messi! Is Neymar! Gorgeous! Cristiano Ronaldo, absolutely astonishing!
But perhaps none of them will make as big an impact on the future of soccer
Morning.
as this man.
We'll get you up and get you ready in the bathroom, okay?
At 28, Pat Grange is the youngest person in the state of New Mexico with ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease.
Doing okay?
To watch such a physical athlete just, lose all motor skill and motor function is just very hard to watch. Just to have some disease come along, I don't really have any answers. It's just a complete mystery.
That's because Pat Grange, not that long ago, could do things like this. But now there are some answers. New scientific findings that could ultimately change how soccer, the game Pat Grange loved, is coached and played.
When you were playing soccer, how did it make you feel?
Alive.
The youngest of three brothers, Pat grew up in Albuquerque playing sports.
Patrick's first word was ball, and he was never without a ball. That was his favorite. He just always loved sports, and soccer became his passion.
In high school, Pat earned all-state honors 3 times.
It was just a joy to watch. It got to a point where everybody expected him to do something. All right, Pat, come on, we need to win this game.
Pat would also excel in the college game, first at the University of Illinois at Chicago, a soccer powerhouse, and then at the University of New Mexico. As a senior in 2004, he was the team's 3rd leading scorer.
Pat had a great talent. Again, his energy was infectious. He was a guy that always showed up to make the play at certain times of the game. I think that was probably one of his best qualities as a player.
He scored goals and he helped us win big games. I mean, he was a natural. He had really good instincts.
We've been a second-half team this whole year, and we knew that going in the second half that we'd have the edge.
There was a passion, a joy about him. I don't think you see that with every player.
After college, Pat hoped to make his passion his career. He played on a semi-pro team in Albuquerque. He also tried out for several teams in Major League Soccer and in England, too, but he didn't make the cut. By the spring of 2010, when he was 27, Pat was coaching and managing an indoor soccer facility. That's when he started feeling weakness and discomfort in his legs.
In the back of my mind, I knew something was really wrong, but I wouldn't tell anybody that.
Why not?
Because I didn't really know, and I didn't want to scare anyone.
He just didn't look right. You could see it in his eyes. He was tired. And so we said, you need to get to see somebody. You need to go to a doctor.
A series of doctor's visits produced no answers. Then, in November of 2010, a neurologist examined Pat.
He had him do all these tests. It was like written all over his face that it wasn't good. And then he brought in another neurologist who specializes in ALS. And she looked at him and, I mean, she walked out of the room and Pat just started crying hysterically and I started crying. And, you know, they didn't even have to tell us. We knew right then.
Haven't stopped crying since. Every day.
ALS is a disease that gradually diminishes muscle and motor function. There's no cure.
You missed a spot in the back.
And most patients die within 5 years of diagnosis.
Now Baines with the time to take a touch and bend it in, but he's...
Less than 6 months after he was diagnosed, Pat was confined to a wheelchair.
The disease is taking away my body, but inside, I'm still myself.
We were all kind of searching for answers, of course. You ask every question in the book when something like this happens to somebody so close, you know.
And so young. ALS typically strikes people twice Pat's age.
What do you guys think?
We still think it's an immune issue, some type of problem in the blood.
You know, you go one way one day and another day, and it's just not clear.
Medical researchers at this time were trying to establish a connection between ALS and soccer. In 2005, a study of former pros in Italy found they were 6.5 times more likely than the general population to get ALS. On April 23, 2011,
Grange on three, Grange on three, 1, 2, 3.
the University of New Mexico, Pat's alma mater, played a charity game to benefit him and ALS research.
What would it mean to you if you were able to help raise awareness?
That is what is most important to me. Even after I'm gone, I want to make a difference.
Da. Da. Try la. La.
When Pat was close to the end, we didn't have the TV on, which was really unusual. And I said, Pat, do you want us to turn on soccer? And he looked at yes. And that was the last thing Pat did when he was still conscious.
I just spent that last night like on the foot of his bed, and he was in his chair, and I just talked to him all night, and he wasn't responsive, but I know he heard everything I said, and I'm glad I said everything I said.
What did you say?
Just that I love him, and I'll always love him, and I'm so proud of him.
Pat Grange died on April 10, 2012. He was 29.
Our Patrick felt more love in the past 17 months than most of us will feel in our entire lifetime.
But this isn't where Pat Grange's story ends. A few days after his death, his parents were contacted by the Sports Legacy Institute at Boston University. Dr. Ann McKee, one of the leading head trauma experts in the nation, has studied the brains of dozens of deceased football players. Now, for the first time, she'd examined the brain of a soccer player.
This is the brain of Patrick Grange. Here, this is a 29-year-old. This is just unbelievable that such a young person could have such dramatic damage.
This past February, almost 2 years after Grange's death, the results were announced. In his brain, McKee found CTE, or chronic traumatic encephalopathy. It's the same disease detected post-mortem in the brains of Dave Duerson, Mike Webster, and Junior Seau, among others.
CTE can affect a soccer player. That's a revelation. We didn't know that before. There were a couple of glaring facts in Patrick's case. He was such a young athlete afflicted with ALS. At death, he clearly had CTE affecting his brain in a very substantial way. So to me, this is a case of trauma-linked ALS.
Pat clearly had suffered his share of head trauma. In 1998, during a high school playoff game, he collided hard with his own goalie. 4 years later, at Illinois-Chicago, another collision would lead to 17 stitches. Those were some of the biggest hits, but they might not have been the most consequential.
Pat only had 2 known concussions, but boy, did he have a lot of headers. The whole issue of subconcussive trauma, these repetitive hits that don't have symptoms, is a really big deal.
Dr. Robert Stern oversees clinical research at BU's Center for the Study of Traumatic Encephalopathy.
What do you think led to Pat Grange's death?
There's only one thing that can lead to CTE that we know of so far, and that's repetitive hits to the head. He started heading the ball when he was 3, and then was a pretty big header throughout his career. Do I think that Pat Grange playing soccer for so long and heading for so long may have been the cause of his ultimate death? I think so.
Fires it in, the header, the goal! That notion that heading a soccer ball could possibly kill you might be startling.
Henry, the diving header!
It wouldn't seem that it could produce the same kind of damage as tackling in football or checking in hockey. But the cumulative effects of heading might be just as traumatic.
Every time you head the ball, it can be around 20 G. Think about driving a car 25, 30 miles per hour into a brick wall. That's almost the equivalent of 20 G. And the typical soccer player does that around 1,000, 1,500 times a year. That's a lot.
I would definitely continue to pay attention to the serious head traumas that come along with playing sport. But obviously, soccer's been along for a very long time, and people have been heading balls for a very long time. So I wouldn't get ahead of ourselves as far as, putting those types of stigmas onto the game.
We can't have this become a media hype that leads to this huge uprising against soccer. Now, are there things that make logical sense that can be done? Perhaps like taking heading out of the game for young kids whose brains are still developing. Between ages 10 and 12, there's this window of vulnerability. We need to do more research.
This summer, billions will watch the World Cup.
Ronaldo!
They'll marvel at the brilliance of the best players on the planet.
Suarez with the header!
But the future of soccer, how it's played, how it's coached, is more likely to be determined by an all but unknown player who died far too young. Pat Grange.
It's very sad that the thing that he loved could have potentially caused his death. But I think Pat would also tell you that he wouldn't have it any other way. I don't think that he would have headed a ball differently. I don't think he ever would have gone up for a challenge any differently.
Knowing what you know now, would you let Pat play soccer?
We would have done things a little differently. We wouldn't have had him doing repeated headers, but we couldn't take soccer away. That was who he was.
When you think about Pat now, what are the things that stand out for you?
That's a hard one. I think about him every day, and it just rips my heart out. But hopefully this will lead to something that will prevent this kind of stuff from happening in the future. And that's the hope I see coming from this.